are very delighted to have Professor Srirang Joshi as the speaker. Professor Joshi is currently heading the Department of Pharmaceutical Sciences and Technology in ICT Mumbai. He has 23 years of experience in various sectors of pharmaceutical industry. Professor Joshi developed and manufactured innovative processes for several active pharmaceutical ingredients and intermediates in various therapeutic areas during his tenure with industry. He successfully implemented technologies on pilot and plant scale. He has skilled in ensuring compliance to quality measures and maintenance of appropriate requisite documentation for safety and data security. Professor Joshi is proficient in diverse areas of pharmaceutical organic chemistry like aromatics, heterocycles, etc. He has more than 30 patents to his credit. He is a peer referee for Organic Process Research and Development, ACS Journal, and on editorial board of Indian Drugs. Professor Joshi is also consultant to some Indian bulk drug industries for advice on process technologies. So with further ado, I will hand over the platform to Professor Joshi. Yeah. Sir, please.
Yeah, let me share the screen.
Yes, sir.
Is my screen visible? Yeah.
Not yet, sir. Yes, sir. Now it's visible.
Now it's visible.
Yes, sir.
What I'm going to do today in the lecture is going to share my experiences of 23 years with industry, and I'm going to deal with one case study of an API and one synthesis of a metabolite, which was needed when I was with the industry for, obviously, for the clinical trials, because that time the metabolites were not available freely. So as and when we will come to that point, that time I will elaborate further. So typically in these 45 minutes, I'm going to deal with the two case studies where we successfully resolved the problem which we were facing, and the company could earn good amount of profit. So the lecture will focus on the process development of a practical synthesis of an API, namely bromhexine, and synthesis of metabolites of glimepiride. The importance of combining synthetic organic chemistry with the innovation is highlighted in this today's lecture. So particularly with bromhexine, bromhexine has an importance today under the COVID atmosphere because it is a COPD drug. We will come to that in a minute's time. Drug of choice, ambroxol, as well as theophylline combination. So they are one class of, theophylline is of course a different class of compounds, but then we will definitely come and see the structural features of bromhexine and ambroxol. Ambroxol is a metabolite, we will come to that, and glimepiride is anti-diabetic. And then there is an innovation in the synthetic organic chemistry, and then the lecture is designed to have an overview of an overall API process development, including the issues of safety, environment, and certainly and surely the economics, because unless until your economics are in place as far as the process development is concerned, there is absolutely no value to your route of synthesis, because if it is not fitting into the economics, no one is going to buy that API from you, even if it is a very, if on paper it may look a very elegant and you may be moving your arrows and everything, but then it carries no importance whatsoever as far as the industry economics are concerned. It may only fetch you a good paper in a good impact factor journal, but as far as economics is concerned, it may be 0 or minus. So real life examples will try to address the creativity, timeline, economics, and environmental and regulatory aspects. So these are essentially featured in this today's lecture, which I'm going to talk to you. And then throughout the global pharmaceutical industry, an important aspect of today is how to best synthesize the APIs and purify APIs. Purity is taken for granted. Impurity profile is more important. Purity is a foregone conclusion. And then of course, the process intermediates. Again, I am highlighting the point with economics in mind to meet stringent analytical specifications. What I mean by stringent, I will come to that in a minute's time. And since I was part of the Indian pharmaceutical industry, I had mainly dealt with several generic API business, that is generic APIs where the API patent has become off patent. So that is APIs which contain same chemical substance as a drug that was originally protected by chemical patent, but now the patent is off patent, and then you can definitely venture into the business of that because the patent has expired. And then the target always in the generic API business, at least I have developed about 25 APIs to my credit. The high quality APIs, all unknown impurities less than 0.1%, all known impurities at par or specifications even better than the originator. So this will be my first part of lecture where I will be dealing with an API, namely bromhexine, relatively simple API, but then there is a creativity in that. And then the synthesis, isolation and characterization of metabolites where good amount of chemistry is involved, which is a part of the second lecture. So let me come to bromhexine first. When I was with that industry, they were in the business of bromhexine hydrochloride, and no sooner I joined, the managing director called me and told that currently we are facing some issues with respect to bromhexine hydrochloride, in the sense that our cost is not meeting because the market price which is prevalent and our cost of manufacture is virtually same. Then there are issues with respect to some solvent. So kindly look into this API because we don't want to lose the business of bromhexine, because we are one of the pioneers in India as far as introducing this generic API was concerned. And then along with that, Ambroxol, which is our now current focus as far as ICD is concerned, we are soon going to start work on Ambroxol, and particularly there is a trans geometry, trans 4-hydroxycyclohexanol is a key intermediate which is currently sourced through China, and that is a big challenge as far as Ambroxol is concerned. So Ambroxol is a metabolite of bromhexine, and today's lecture is, in a way, I'm going to focus on bromhexine. Bromhexine metabolite is Ambroxol, and then I'm going to deal with the synthesis of glimepiride metabolite. So today's scenario, it so happened that we are going to talk about metabolites, but here, as far as bromhexine is concerned, bromhexine is a parent molecule. Ambroxol, we are yet to develop a cost-effective technology which will be totally Indian, because as of today, one key intermediate is outsourced from China. As far as some marketed liquid formulations are concerned, we have bromhexine hydrochloride and Ambroxol hydrochloride. I have just now told you, both are currently available in market. And then there is also salt. Acebrophylline is a better choice than theophylline, which are used for COPD patients, that is the chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and particularly those who are having the chest infection, particularly in COVID. The Ambroxol or acebrophylline is a drug or the syrup of choice. So that's why I've just narrated few marketed formulations. And then bromhexine itself is a poor man's, I will say, mucolytic agent. So acebrophylline is a compound of Ambroxol and theophylline, which we are not going to deal with in today's lecture. We are talking about the parent compound bromhexine. And then bromhexine. Bromhexine is a COPD, that is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. It is used for that. And we have to identify the suitable, as far as the study was concerned, bromhexine. You have to identify the brominating agent. If you see the structure of bromhexine, there are bromine in the molecule, and then you have to brominated compound, and then you have to identify a suitable brominating agent, because I will come to that chemistry in a minute's time. Then replacement of an ozone depleting agent, which was the solvent used in manufacture of this API. And then we definitely had a closer look at bromhexine synthesis, which was prevalent when I joined the company. And then what was the scenario? We will come to that in a minute's time. And then we employed use of ranitidine catalyst to replace traditional Bechamp reduction. So these were three essential features which were later on realized when bromhexine hydrochloride technology was perfected at my group. And then bromhexine as well as Ambroxol, both are widely used as expectorants, a medication that helps to bring up mucus and other material from lungs, bronchi, and trachea. Bromhexine is intended to support body's mechanism for clearing mucus and respiratory disease, and precisely for this, in COVID, it is one of the drug of choice, particularly those who are having the chest infection. Ambroxol is indicated as a sacrolytic therapy in bronchopulmonary diseases associated with abnormal mucus secretion. It's a better drug than bromhexine. And precisely for this reason, we have taken up the synthesis in ICT. Ambroxyl hydrochloride is a metabolite of bromhexene hydrochloride, which I have few minutes back I have told, that stimulates the mucociliary action and clears the air passages in the respiratory tract and usually administered as a hydrochloride. So I'm going to talk about the bromhexene. And then the flowchart from bromhexene hydrochloride is in front of you now. This is the original process when I joined the company. And typically with my young friends, I would like to tell that in industry, you'll have to have the colloquial names. So as far as we are MTech, BTechs or PhDs, then we always see 2-nitrotoluene, then 2-nitro-N-cyclohexyl, benzene, methamine. So all these are for us. But whenever a layman or a worker who is doing, he probably, you may think he is doing a mundane job, but then he is regularly and routinely producing an API of a quality where because if the process is perfect, then he is going to produce an API where the limit is all unknown impurity is less than 0.1%, known impurity is not more than 0.15%. That is not a joke. So here, the colloquial names as far as the industry is concerned, so precisely coming to the point, ONT, orthonitrotoluene, and then BRX1, BRX2, and then the intermediate, which is 2-nitrobenzyl bromide, is not isolated, was not isolated in our case also when we perfected the process. So the flowchart of bromhexene hydrochloride is in front of you. And in the original process narrates a bromination with N-bromosuccinimide, uses a radical reaction for side chain bromination. You will see there CH2Br, and then benzoyl peroxide was used. And then carbon tetrachloride was employed, which is it was an ozone depleting agent. And then 2-nitrobenzyl bromide was carried in forward in situ along with the CCl4 solution after filtration of N, after the succinimide it's getting precipitated. And then you are treating this with N-methyl cyclohexylamine, and then you are going to get BRX1 or as far as the IUPAC name is concerned, 2-nitro-N-cyclohexyl N-methyl benzene methamine. And then you are doing the Béchamp reduction of that NO2 to NH2, and then you are going to get bromhexene hydrobromide. What you have to do is essentially go back to a base, neutralize the base, and come back to the hydrochloride salt, because bromhexene hydrochloride is marketed form, not the hydrobromide form. And then I have deliberately marked the reagents bromination, N-bromosuccinimide, benzoyl peroxide, CCl4, Béchamp reduction, iron and iron chloride. And then I have mentioned there for the IUPAC name, those who are interested in the chemistry, 2, 3, 4, 5, all positions. So 2-amino, 3,5-dibromo, N-cyclohexyl, N-methyl, benzene, methamine, hydrobromide. No one talks in the industry like this. Whenever if you are joining in the production, then you will say starting material ONT liya kya, or what is the BRX1 yield or BRX2 yield, or final bromhexene hydrochloride yield. So these are the colloquial names which are prevalent in industry. And then after a careful look, when the problem was given to me, no sooner I joined the company, I realized that there is a scope for further improvement of the process and to be back in the business. So we thought that we could change the N-bromosuccinimide to another brominating agent. Again, radical bromination is there. And instead of N-bromosuccinimide, you can use dibromodimethyl hydantoin as a reagent of choice, which I will come in a minute's time. There is a scope to even change from benzoyl peroxide, even though it is a catalytic compound used for the radical initiator. AIBN is a better choice. CCl4, I will come to that in my next slides. So manufacture of bromhexene hydrochloride, when we had a close look at the structure or close look at the process, we realized that the original manufacturing process, if you see typical old literature, you will find as carbon tetrachloride is a solvent of choice for any bromination reactions. And then you are carrying out the bromination with N-bromosuccinimide, which is fairly expensive, followed by a Béchamp reduction with large use of iron and iron chloride, that is a catalytic one. So the reaction becomes slightly faster. This method has obvious disadvantages when was viewed through lens. And then we realized that on commercial scale, even though they were operative in the market, they were not able to fetch a good price. In fact, the price, there were hardly any profits, and an overall yield was less than 25%. And then there was a good scope to improve upon the existing process. Then what we decided that we had a close look at the brominating agents. So instead of N-bromosuccinimide, dibromodimethyl hydantoin was found to be a reagent of choice from the literature. And then we also saw the properties. And then we realized that it is a versatile organic reagent like N-bromosuccinimide, offers advantage of being more stable, less costly on a bromine equivalent basis than NBS. Both DBDMH and NBS are solids, so there is a weighing advantage. So as far as weighing advantage is concerned, DBDMH and N-bromosuccinimide, they are at par. But then this offers an advantage being more stable and less costly on bromine equivalent. Shelf life of dibromodimethyl adentoin is indefinite at a normal ambient conditions when properly stored in an original container, which is not the case with N-bromosuccinimide. It's a suitable alternative to N-bromosuccinimide. Dibromodimethyl adentoin gives a better yield than NBS in our case when we perfected the reaction conditions, and then it proved to be a reagent of choice for the regioselective monobromination of side chain methyl group to CH2Br. It's a stable solid. Reactions have been reported in polar, non-polar solvents, and even aqueous alkaline solutions as a scavenger for HBr liberated, avoiding the side reactions. So we studied the dibromodimethyl adentoin and fairly come to a conclusion that this reagent definitely needs to be explored in place of N-bromosuccinimide, and precisely that we did. And then when we realized that another advantage is cost. Dibromodimethyl adentoin is less expensive by a factor of about 4. And then you are using these stoichiometric quantities. So dibromodimethyl adentoin contains 2 bromine atoms, whereas N-bromosuccinimide contains only 1. Therefore, the total weight of dibromodimethyl adentoin need to provide the bromine loading is less by a factor of 0.8 as compared to N-bromosuccinimide. When you do the calculations, you will realize this. And this is an advantage because of the reduced cost to handle the reduced mass of brominating agent, and then the degree of recovery of organic carrier molecule, that is the hydantoin moiety after brominating step is there. You can recycle the product for again fresh brominating the dimethyl adentoin to dibromodimethyl adentoin. So you can recover the matte. Of course, same is the case with N-bromosuccinimide. You isolate succinimide, but then the cost was the one factor, and then the dibromodimethyl adentoin contains 2 bromine atoms, whereas N-bromosuccinimide 1, and total weight need to provide the bromine loading is less by a factor of 0.8 was a crucial factor in deciding that DBDMH will be a reagent of choice versus N-bromosuccinimide. Other drawback of the synthesis, when we had a careful look, that is the traditional carbon tetrachloride was used in the manufacturing process, and by the time this I was talking about 10 to 15 years back, we were the signatories to the Montreal Protocol, that is United Nations Environmental Program, and India is signatory to it with a worldwide agreement designated to protect the human health and environment against the adverse effects of depleting or stratospheric ozone layer. So carbon tetrachloride is a ozone depleting agent. Then particularly when you are handling carbon tetrachloride on large scale, the workers are getting exposed to the vapors of carbon tetrachloride because you are carrying out the bromination at higher temperatures, and then that dense vapors typically go in the lungs of the operator, and then the operator suffocates. So this was one of the major problems. In fact, my advice to you all, those who are into development, that whenever you are going to tackle any problem of development, first and foremost thing you should do is, rather than starting your work, you should first go to the plant and talk to a worker, and then he will be able to realize, and then you will be able to realize what are the actual difficulties felt by the which are felt by the worker. And then when I visited their plant in Roha, then the workers were saying the whole carbon tetrachloride vapor is going in our lungs, and then we are having a huge problem. Even breathing problem is also there. So sir, kuch bhi karo, lekin ye carbon tetrachloride nikal do. So carbon tetrachloride was the first thing to be removed. So next target after DBDMH was there was to try a better substitute for carbon tetrachloride. Probably some of you may find these things very trivial, but as far as process development is concerned, they have an immense importance, because when I come to a final process, that time you will realize the importance of all these taken together. So carbon tetrachloride was our next target, that we have to replace carbon tetrachloride, which is an ozone depleting agent, and workers are facing the problem because of the vapors, which are dense vapors prevalent in the atmosphere of the plant, And then the increased UV can lead to reduced crop yield. So again, carbon tetrachloride is a suspected carcinogen, cardiovascular, blood, liver, kidney, neuro, respiratory for toxicity. And then the chemical with ozone depleting properties, which I have told just now, and also it induces mutagenicity. So overall, when we looked at the process, we realized that NBS has to be replaced, and more importantly, the solvent which was employed by the industry by typically adhering to the original process of carbon tetrachloride has to be replaced. So more hazardous compound to ecosystem and human health, and inhalation and ingestion are harmful and sometimes even may be fatal. So that was our next target. Then the need to replace carbon tetrachloride in manufacturing process thus became inevitable. But then when you talk about this and when you talk to regulatory affairs people, then definitely they will be definitely hesitant, because this process was already established on plant scale. It was validated with respect to yield and quality. Even though the yields and everything were okay, quality was okay, they were not able to market that. That was a different issue. But then process was already established. A solvent change, those who have already done the regulatory aspects or validation, a solvent change is considered to be a major change from regulatory perspective and warrants revalidation. API was earlier exported to regulated market with proper documentation in place for some time. Newer solvent chosen should match yield and quality, should not pose health hazards like carbon tetrachloride, should be compatible with brominating reagent and approved solvent as per ICH, that is International Conference on Harmonization, should be cost effective with raw materials and routinely recovered and recycled. So one change of solvent, several factors come into that. And then first and foremost is the stiff resistance from regulatory people, because solvent change is considered to be a major change. But then, having joined there as a vice president of research and development with a blessings, I will say, from the managing director, we were able to convince regulatory team, and we decided to opt for a change of solvent because it was inevitable. Carbon tetrachloride was definitely a not suitable solvent. And then immediately, when such decisions are taken in on the top level, then immediately you have to take the alternative solvents to try, and then you have to do 1 or 2 trials and then draw a conclusion. So several solvents were tried, and then even aqueous alkali, which is not present here because which was a part of the previous slide, so I have not mentioned over here. So EDC, ethylene dichloride, chloroform, acetic acid, cyclohexane, methyl tertiary butyl ether, ethyl acetate, propyl acetate, isobutyl acetate, and of course aqueous alkali and chlorobenzene were tried quickly. And then this job was done because by giving this job two or three, if you have a team of 4 people working on, say, bromhexane, initially 1 or 2 reactions will suffice. So this whole exercise was complete within 15 days. And then we came to a conclusion that chlorobenzene was found to be the best alternative or solvent of choice, meeting all criteria, which with respect to yield, with respect to impurity profile, because purity is a foregone conclusion, and then solvent of choice, and then definitely the recovery and everything. And then carbon tetrachloride is a class 1 solvent. And then concentration limit, that is in your final API, the limit is 4 ppm. It's a suspected carcinogen. When we shifted from carbon tetrachloride to chlorobenzene, the limit is 360, virtually 90-fold, that is 100, almost 100. And then permissible daily exposure is 3.6. That is, concern is a carcinogen. So chlorobenzene was found to be, even though it was a class 2 solvent, was proved to be a solvent of choice. And then radical initiation by initiators, because that was another problem. So these are, in chemistry, the radical initiators are substances that can produce radical species under the mild conditions. And here we have a classic case of side chain bromination with radical initiators. And then the original process was with organic peroxides, where the peroxide bond is there. Instead of peroxide, if we are able to, and then this is the reaction which is the peroxide bond is getting cleaved, and then further you are going to get carbon dioxide liberated. And then there are several ditertiary butyl peroxide. There are several peroxides which are there as a radical initiator. Then we found that the azo compounds, particularly the AIBN and ABCN, that is 1,1-azo bis cyclohexane carbonitrile. So compared to with cost, we found that AIBN is a radical initiator of choice compared to benzoyl peroxide, because there were some explosion risk of benzoyl peroxide is far more than AIBN. And since the quantity is required in catalytic amount, AIBN, though costly than benzoyl peroxide, we don't want any risk because we were targeting double the production of the bromhexene hydrochloride. So BPO, that is benzoyl peroxide, was suitably substituted by AIBN, and the byproduct is nitrogen. So you don't have to worry at all. So AIBN, in presence of heat at 60 degrees, it gives the radical, which is depicted there in the slide, and then nitrogen is getting evolved. And then you successfully, we replaced the BPO, that is benzoyl peroxide, by as isobutyl butyronitride. And then now the synthesis looks like this. ONT, you are doing the bromination with dibromo-dimethyl identoin. You are using AIBN as a catalyst. You have replaced the carbon tetrachloride, which was chlorobenzene, as a solvent. And then you are again able to carry out the reaction in situ to BRX1 by treating with N-methyl cyclohexylamine, because no change with respect to chemistry was there. And then chlorobenzene, you are able to take the reaction. And now again, you will see the blue color Bechamp reduction is there. So the job was half done. Whatever has been marked in magenta color is the half success story. That is dibromo-dimethyl identoin successfully replacing N-bromosuccinimide, AIBN replacing BPO, chlorobenzene in place of carbon tetrachloride. So job was half done, and we were really thrilled. And then we were looking for replacing the Bechamp reduction, which was taking hours and hours as far as the plant occupation time was concerned. Those who have done chemical process economics will easily realize this. Before coming to what we did with Bechamp reduction, of course, I have narrated in my first slide that we have replaced successfully by Raney nickel. But then these are the bromhexene impurities which are there. And the next target was to environmentally polluting Bechamp reduction. Bechamp reduction, some facts are, it was discovered in 1854, very old reaction, commercialization by 1857 by Perkin. Original process with HCl and large amount of iron was used. Theoretical quantities, even more quantities are required. Then typically the reaction is for the nitro benzene plus iron plus HCl, which is giving aniline plus water plus FeCl3. And on industrial scale, less than 2% of theoretical HCl is used. That was the, I will say, the discovery after a few years. But in the presence of free acid, shown to be unnecessary, and then the reaction can be performed in alcoholic and aqueous solution. And then the major problem as far as Bechamp reduction was concerned was large excess of iron, which was used in the reaction. So use of iron and iron chloride, huge amount of waste generation. Disposal was a big problem. You cannot go for even landfilling. Slow filtration rates, long batch cycle times. Almost one shift used to go when you are doing Noosh filtering of the compound. So, and then low productivity in plants. So one shift you literally used to sit in and they just used to observe what is getting trickling down. And then that was the scenario as far as the this reduction was concerned. And then we definitely had to ensure that we have to replace this. So Bechamp reduction is used to reduce the aromatic nitro compounds to corresponding amines using iron and HCl, and it can only be applied to aromatic species, as the aliphatic nitro group is much more difficult to reduce completely, often remaining as a hydroxylamine. And in our case, the substrate to iron sludge ratio was typically 1:1.5, and our batch size was typically around 300 kgs. So 450 kgs of iron sludge used to getting, and this was on weight basis, not on the stoichiometric quantities. So earlier waste generation in the fine chemical industry was not widely accepted, but now this is because you would like to have greener processes. And then this was the next target, that Noosh filtration has to be avoided, and then you have to go for alternative reducing agent nitro to amino and bypass the traditional Bechamp reduction, which is involving a Noosh filtration. So why choose catalytic hydrogenation to Bechamp reduction? Simple workup. Those who have done chemistry or chemical engineering operations, they will realize that if there is a sparkler filter, then you can easily recover the Raney nickel, which was in our case. So simple workup, general clean reactions, no extra ions or compounds to deal with, just remove the solvent, and can be done neat if the substrate and product are free flowing liquids. Most cost effective for choice for scale up. And in downstream processing, spent catalyst is usually recoverable for few successive runs for cost savings. In fact, my observations with Ranni nickel is, if you are having Ranni nickel and you are using for first time, second time, in fact, it becomes more active. So the hydrogenation becomes very fast, or reduction becomes very fast. Third will be at par with the original one, that is the virgin, I will say Ranni nickel. Fourth one will take typically slower time. So 1 plus 3 is typically, as far as Ranni nickel is concerned, you can easily recycle Ranni nickel, typically 1 plus 3, that is 4 times. Current cost of Ranni nickel is around 1400 rupees kg. And then obviously some of my colleagues were also saying, why not use noble metal catalyst? Here we avoided noble metal catalyst because today bromhexene cost is around 1500 rupees kg. RMC is around 950 to 1000 rupees kg, and we cannot afford to have palladium charcoal, which is around 1 lakh rupees a kg. So even though hydrogenation may be slightly, maybe fetching, but in our case, noble metal catalyst, we just gave 1 or 2 trials, and then because the cost of bromhexene was a limiting factor, so palladium on carbon or platinum oxide were totally ruled out, because whatever is available with 1400 rupees kg, we cannot afford to have 56,000 or 1 lakh rupees kg catalyst. So we tried with Ranni nickel. Ranni nickel was preferred for cost, and it worked well in our case, particular type of Ranni nickel, which I will come to that. Catalytic reduction is unquestionably the workhorse of organic synthesis. It perfectly embodies the concept of precision in organic synthesis with 100% atom efficiency, except the reduction of RNO2, where water is formed as a co-product. The replacement of classical stoichiometric reagent, which was iron in our case, was totally achieved. Overall time cycle got reduced by 60%, and productivity increased almost threefold. So this was the overall, I will say, the gain as far as the replacement of iron HCl by Ranni nickel was concerned. What are Ranni nickels? An alloy of metal or aluminum, metal and aluminum, is made by melting together in form of certain proportions. Aluminum is dissolved away using sodium hydroxide solution. Remaining metal form alloy domains becomes the particles with high surface area and are charged with hydrogen. It is extremely flammable. You are not supposed to dry Ranni nickel in air, otherwise it will catch fire, and must be handled in wet conditions with water. Commercially available, but best prepared just before the use. So whenever you want to use, you have to just give wash with water, and then come to a neutral pH, and then you have to give 2 or 3 washes. Particularly alcoholic solvents are used, so whatever remaining water is there is also taken care with Ranni nickel. So the hydrogenation catalyst Ranni nickel is recycled, and in our case again it was recycled for 3 times, that is 1 plus 3, that is equal to 4, and then VRX1 is reduced with Ranni nickel in ethanol as a solvent. Mind you, over here ethanol was deliberately chosen because methanol was giving low yields. We also tried methanol and ethanol. For those who want to join the industry, ethanol we require a license, but then the company in which I was working was having a license, so that, and when sometimes even change of solvent like methanol and ethanol, one may be surprised, but then ethanol gives a better yield. So we tried methanol, acetic acid, mixture of methanol and ethanol as possible alternatives. Ethanol was found to be best solvent for hydrogenation, and we, even though ethanol requires a license, we opt for ethanol as a solvent. BRX2 was the next brominated using liquid bromine in ethanol to yield bromhexene hydrobromide. Neutralization followed by treatment with HCl affords hydrochloride salt. So this was for the story of bromhexene hydrochloride is concerned. Then the flow chart of bromhexene hydrochloride final process. So everything what was remaining in blue has now been taken care. So bromination with dibromodimethyl adentoin, catalyst AIBN, chlorobenzene, N-methyl cyclohexene, and then again chlorobenzene as a solvent, reduction with Ranni nickel, bromination, and then converting it back to base, bromhexene base and bromhexene hydrochloride. So the process was perfected in all respects: dibromodimethyl adentoin, AIBN, chlorobenzene as a solvent, replacing Bechamp reduction, Ranni nickel, hydrogen and ethanol, and then we were able to through with the bromhexene hydrochloride. So for reduction of nitro compounds to amino compounds, Calcat C, A, B, C, D type. Please don't ask me the question which Calcat, because in ICT now I have learned I will say the balancing act, which aspects of technology to be revealed to students, because students should not be deprived of the latest technology. At the same time, the industry secrets have also to be maintained, or they have to be protected. So I have definitely not mentioned over here. Please also don't ask me, Rani nickel at what temperature. I have given a range. So 40 to 100 degrees centigrade, we are doing at a particular temperature. Calcat C, ABCD type, Rani nickel. Again, pressure is again kept open 1 to 10 bar, hydrogen gas. But then this was the scenario which was employed, and ethanol as a solvent was found to be the best. Reaction time was 3 to 4. So temperature, pressure, and catalyst type are the industry secrets. Catalyst load of 3% was sufficient for reaction completion. With high catalyst load, reaction was completed in 1 hour, and subsequently the high impurity levels. Similarly, with low levels of catalyst load, reaction took longer time to complete with significant high impurity levels. Activated alloy catalyst, Calcat C ABCD type, is a fine black powder suspended in water and in pH between 8 to 10, and was procured from Monarch Catalyst Private Limited, Dombivli. And after completion of reaction, the catalyst was filtered. Filtrate was used as such for next ring bromination using bromine. So what we have done over here is coupling of the two reactions, and then coupling of the two steps was achieved with significant reduction in total batch cycle time. So almost twofold. So we have done significant improvement as far as the process optimization is concerned. And then we immediately applied for a patent, which we were immediately granted, an improved process for manufacture of 2-amino 3,5-bromo-N-cyclohexyl, that is bromhexene hydrochloride. And this is our patent number. We had a license to manufacture this API. Operations were discontinued in the industry where, when I joined, as earlier process was no longer cost effective and hence economically unviable to operate. Also, process was labor oriented due to need of handling huge quantities of iron residues. The process development project has helped us to regain the original lost market share for both export domestic as well as for captive supply of bromhexene hydrochloride. We filed a new patent and a new drug master file because we were operating in the regulatory market, and then the new process become economically viable with cost reduction in raw materials to a tune of 35% plus alone, because there was a saving with respect to time, saving with respect to recovery, saving with respect to recycle of the Rani nickel catalyst. So overall the process, and then we were in the market with a bang, and then we were able to supply, and then the batch size got increased, the monthly production, because 60% time was saved, because which was there for the iron filtration was there. So we entered the regulated market. New process became environment friendly and thus can be truly termed as green. The process has led to the reduction of manpower requirement. Bromhexene hydrochloride is exported to many countries and is a drug of choice for several formulations. World market requirement is greater than 500 tons per year. In fact, it is more now. The new process developed produces no waste, no iron sludge. Earlier process produced the waste in tons and posed environmental hazard. Even the catalyst used in the new process is routinely recovered, reused, and recycled. What I generally call as a 3R principle: recover, reuse, and recycle. So the process became green, and we were able to market the product in, and then once we were through with the DMF filing. Now let me come to the as far as the metabolite is concerned. This was the story as far as the bromhexene hydrochloride was concerned. And now let me come to the another case study, which is the metabolites. Metabolites, particularly as far as glimepiride was concerned, any substance produced by a metabolic reaction, that is a chemical reaction in the body, including chemicals formed by the metabolic transformation of a drug. And then the studies on metabolism, therapeutically active substances are increasingly being carried out, as metabolites provide superior safety and efficacy, and are importantly offer opportunities to study the metabolic pathways. Here, the chemistry was involved. Earlier, the bromhexene, the yield, everything was here. Here we had perfected the technology of glimepiride, which I can describe some other time. But here then we were confronted, because as Sanofi were the manufacturers of the originators, so that is glimepiride. But then when in the Indian market, the metabolites were not available. And then the company asked us, while we were on the finishing touches of glimepiride, we were asked to synthesize the metabolites. And then when we looked at the metabolites of glimepiride, well, I will come to that in a minute's time. Among the sulfonylurea class of compounds, the anti-diabetic agents, glimepiride has distinctive advantage. It is by far the most superior blood glucose lowering agent, used as a once a daily administration API, typically 1 milligram to 4 milligram, with metformin 1 milligram, 2 milligram, 3 milligram, 4 milligram dose for taking care of blood glucose levels. Glimepiride, yes, glimepiride prevents excessive insulin release, thereby decreasing the risk of hypoglycemia. Glimepiride needs to produce the metabolites of. You are not able to hear? Hello? Are you able to hear? Hello?
Yes, sir. You are audible, sir. I think there was some disturbance.
So glimepiride need to produce the metabolites for bioequivalence, and then the metabolism of glimepiride has been observed in animals and humans, and then the oxidative pathways gives rise to two metabolites of glimepiride, and in spite of their significance in metabolic studies, their synthesis were not accomplished, and we were the first in India as far to market the generic version of glimepiride after Sanofi, and then we were required by CGI to do the clinical studies wherein the trans-hydroxyglimepiride 2B and carboxyglimepiride, the fourth structure on the bottom. So these two were supposed to be synthesized, but they were not available because Sanofi were holding those. And then this was the structure of glimepiride. And then you will only realize that here CH3 has become CH2OH and CH3 has become COOH. And then the whole chemistry as far as this part is concerned, it's totally changed, though this part is definitely same. But then the moment you are having CH2OH, the chemistry is different when you are going to deal with the synthesis part. So here the aim was to synthesize trans-hydroxyglimepiride and carboxyglimepiride, wherein good amount of chemistry knowledge was put to test by the company as well as the non-availability of the metabolites. So trans-hydroxyglimepiride and carboxyglimepiride were the immediate targets. But then later on, it was proved when the study were completed for the trans-hydroxyglimepiride, to our surprise, that carboxyglimepiride metabolite is just 1/6 active than glimepiride, whereas trans-hydroxyglimepiride about 2/3 active was there compared to glimepiride. So it was not the case that metabolite was more active than the parent compound. And then we were confronted with the synthesis of trans-hydroxyglimepiride for the clinical studies. And if you see the synthesis of sulfonamide derivative, particularly over here, if you see over here the sulfonamide, this part where I am revolving this, and then if you are able to see over here, the sulfonamide part is same as far as glimepiride is concerned, or trans-hydroxyglimepiride is concerned. So we confine to the original route of glimepiride. If you start, I will come to that, ethyl acetoacetate. You are doing the alkylation with ethyl group over here, ethyl group. Then you are doing the cyanohydric reaction by treating this with potassium cyanide, and typically the students from Mumbai will realize that you are using sodium cyanide X because sodium cyanide powder is not encouraged. And then you are doing the reduction. In this reaction, 5 reactions are taking simultaneously, and you are going to get pyrrolidine derivative. I am going to describe the mechanism in the next slide. And then you are doing the again hydrogenation and ranitidine. Then we will see this pyrrolidine derivative is getting formed. You are getting knocked off this acetate derivative, and then you are going to treat this with phenyl isocyanate, and then you are going to get this corresponding this derivative, and then you are going sulfonation followed by amination. You are going to get sulfonamide derivative, which is exactly the common part as far as glimepiride is concerned, but not with the cyclohexyl moiety. Cyclohexyl moiety, here you go for trans-cyclohexyl amine, trans-cyclohexyl amine, and here you have to have a total different chemistry than you are going to which you are going to employ for the hydroxyglimepiride. Then this portion as the sulfonamide derivative is exactly the same. And then if you are going, and then further studies are by this, if you are going to get this sulfonamide, you are going to get this typically the trans-4-methyl cyclohexylamine, and then you are going to form its isocyanate, and then condense, you are going to get glimepiride. And then this is typical glimepiride synthesis. There is one more route of synthesis which is not that cost effective. Then to get, instead of this methyl over here, and to get a hydroxymethyl, you totally employ a different chemistry altogether, wherein you should have good knowledge of chemistry. Then what is happening as far as this pyrrole pyrrole 1-1 derivative is there. So if you are having ethyl acetate, and if you are treating this with base and ethyl sulfate, you are going to do alkylation at the active methylene position, and then you are going to get ethyl to ethyl 3 oxobutanoate. And then this is a very traditional simple reaction. You are doing the alkylation at the active methylene flanked by the two electron withdrawing groups, and then you are treating this with sodium cyanide, and naturally it will go over here, and you are going to get a cyanohydrin derivative. And when you are doing tanny-nickel hydrogenation, what is going to happen over here is CN will get converted to CH2NH, is shown over here. This NH2 will attack over here on this carbonyl carbon, and then the ethanol, the ethoxy compound is getting knocked off, and then the base is there which will pick up, and then you will form a double bond over here, and this NH. Oh, what has happened? So, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, sir.
The base is picking up that hydrogen, and the water is getting liberated, and then acetylation is also taking place, and you are going to get a pyrrole 3 ethyl 4 methyl 1H pyrrole on. So this is typically the yield reported. This was only one available paper was there in JSES, that is Journal of American Chemical Society, and the drug was reported in Journal of Medicinal Chemistry. The overall yield for this total 5 reactions was initially reported to be just 7%, which we perfected to a tune of about 30%, which was a very good, I will say, in those time, it was a very good development. Now the yields have been further optimized, and you are going to synthesize. We were the first one to synthesize this pyrrole 3 ethyl 4 methyl 1H pyrrole 2 5H on in India for the first time, and then 5 reactions are taking place. So cyanohydrin followed by reduction, followed by NH2 attacking the ester moiety, forming a 5-membered ring, elimination of water, and acetylation of NH. So all reactions are taking place simultaneously, and then you are deprotecting that with sodium carbonate, and then you are going to get the pyrrole derivative. And then we started with cyclohexane 1, that is cyclohexane dione, 1,4-cyclohexane dione, and then this is the total chemistry which was totally developed new. And then we protected the ketal, that is mono 1 keto group of the 1,4-cyclohexane dione was protected as ethylene ketal, and then with the other free carbonyl carbon was treated with a Wittig reagent, and then we got a Wittig product which we did hydroboration, and then we got, and then immediately hydroboration was done, and then we protected that with paramethoxy benzyl bromide PFB. So immediately the hydroxy, the primary hydroxy was protected as paramethoxy benzyl derivative, and then we deprotected the ketal group. We got the ketone group back. So with the hydroxy group incorporated over there, and then we form an oxime by treating with hydroxylamine followed by reduction, and then we were trying to separate the NH2 group over here. If you see the number 9, we were trying to separate the cis and trans isomer, but then this proved to be so we were little discouraged because that separation of cis and trans isomer was not taking place in our hands. It was unsuccessful exercise at our end, but then we had not given up. Then what we did was, instead of that NH2, we directly converted that mixture of cis and trans, that is amino compound, with a protected hydroxy group OPMB to corresponding isocyanate derivative. So an attempt to separate cis and trans mixture of PMB protected cyclohexylamine derivative was not successful in our hands. Several attempts were tried at our end before doing the treatment with phosgene, but then even the chromatography was attempted because they were all metabolites and the requirement was about 25 to 50 grams. It was not a kilogram scale, but here the chemistry was more important. But then finally we decided to continue our strategy with cis and trans mixture and envisage the separation at a later stage of a synthetic sequence, and then that proved to be a successful, because what we did, we continued that, and then whatever that PMB derivative was there, that we condensed with that sulfonamide derivative which was shown over here in this slide. this sulfonamide and the PMB derivative were condensed together, and we got hydroxy substituted, that is that is mixture of hydroxy glimepiride with a PMB protected, and then we deprotected the PMB by treatment with BF3 thread. I must mention over here that is the deprotection of paramethoxybenzyl bromide. So that was the protecting group which was employed, and then the deprotection with BF3 thread was reported for first time, and in fact that was one of the salient features in our tetrahedral letters papers which we subsequently published. And then that was the deprotection, and then when we deprotected that, then we were at this point we were able to separate the cis and trans isomers when the whole glimepiride, that is the hydroxy glimepiride moiety structure, was there in our place. When the condensation took place, we were able to separate the cis and trans mixture. I will show the HPLC graph also. So the reagents and conditions were potassium carbonate and acetone reflux for about 8 hours. We got the condensed product with sulfonamide and that isocyanate, and then followed by deprotection with BF3 thread in dichloromethane as a solvent at room temperature. 65% yield of the hydroxyglimepiride mixture was obtained, and then we got a mixture of cis and trans hydroxyglimepiride, and then we were able to separate by a preparative HPLC. Deprotection of PMB group turned out to be difficult. When we saw the literature, DDQ in aqueous acetonitrile, that is dichlorodicyanoquinone, that is the benzoquinone, DDQ is in aqueous acetonitrile, was a reagent of choice employed by many others. But then in our case, when glimepiride was there, we were getting number of products and we were not able to judge which is the hydroxy compound. So best results were obtained with catalytic amount of BF3 thread in dichloromethane at 0 degrees centigrade, giving mixture of cis and trans hydroxyglimepiride supported fully by proton NMR, elemental analysis and mass. It is pertinent to mention that to best of our knowledge that time, the deprotection of PMB group with BF3 thread was reported for first time in the literature, and then this was widely acknowledged by the reviewer when we submitted our manuscript for letters. Separation of cis and trans mixtures of hydroxyglimepirides were accomplished by preparative HPLC. Here we could afford preparative HPLC because here chemistry was more important. 20 to 50 grams of metabolite was required because hydroxyglimepiride was more active. Carboxyglimepiride was not required. And then in ODS column, we were able to separate, and we had a big column. So 25 grams input mixture, we were able to separate about 12 grams, about 10 to 12 grams of the trans isomer. Mobile phase was 40 to 60 acetonitrile and pH 3 buffer. Loading initially 1 gram to standardize the conditions on small prep HPLC, followed by a preparative HPLC which can cater to about 25 grams input mixture was later on at our disposal, and then we used that. And then based on the comparison of their H1 NMR and C13 NMR of the authentic glimepiride, where that trans, because glimepiride is a trans compound, so we could locate, and then we were able to separate and we were able to successfully accomplish the synthesis of cis and trans hydroxyglimepiride using a straightforward method. And then this was the mixture of cis and trans isomers. This was the trans isomer. This was the cis isomer. Retention time was 6.43, 52.53 is the area. 6.71 was the retention time for the hydroxyglimepiride. Typically, if you are able to see, particularly in glimepiride, the trans isomer typically appears around 6.4 trans glimepiride, the trans isomer, whereas the hydroxyglimepiride typically appears at 6.7 to 6.8. This was in our case when we isolated the two compounds, and then the trans isomer, which was matching to 6.4. 6.4 is with the value which is matching with the glimepiride. Hydroxyglimepiride, some variation is bound to be there, so 0.03, and then that was trans. And then particularly this NH, when it is coupling over here, we will get a doublet. And then you are typically getting this at 6.7, and then we were able to clear cut do the separation, and we were able to get the two isomers with the cis NH typically appearing at 6.7 and trans at 6.43, and we were able to separate the two hydroxyglimepirides, H1 NMR of cis and trans NMRs. And HPLC of the trans isomer which we were able to get was 99.92% typically, and then which was hardly any cis isomer, 0.08, and when it was more than sufficient for the clinical trials. And then we were the first company in India to market the generic version of glimepiride after Sanofi, virtually after 6 months, we were able to put in the market and we were the first company. And then when the whole study was there, it has to be also backed up by the mass, and then we got the fast atom bombardment mass, that is the chemical ionization 529. 507 is the molecular weight of hydrox, and then we got it was successfully proved by even the mass. Molecular weight is 506 m plus 1, so 507 and 529 m plus 29. So the trans isomer was established based on NMR studies, C13 studies, and mass studies, and then we were able to separate the cis and trans isomers of hydroxyglimepiride, and we were able to give about 25 grams in about 3 months' time to the clinical trial agency, and they were able to do the clinical trials on fast track. And the result of the International Conference on Harmonization, the drug product standards, that is the impurities in specifications, identification, and qualification of impurities in drug substances, are getting harmonized. You need NMR, IR, UV, all these tools at your disposal. Then only you can file a successful DMF. Successful synthesis of cis and trans hydroxyglimepiride were achieved for first time and were used in bioequivalence study. And later on, we were allowed by the management, because trans hydroxyglimepiride or cis hydroxyglimepiride were never marketed. They were only required for the bioequivalence study. So this was more of a theoretical exercise, but from the industry perspective, to be first among the generic players, this was of utmost importance. So when whole study and everything was performed, then we were able to, allowed by the management, to publish the work on total synthesis of cis and trans hydroxyglimepiride, the active metabolite of glimepiride, where you will see my name there appeared in Tetrad Letters, and then this we published in 2003, and then we sent on 26 February, which was immediately accepted in received and accepted in on 2nd May with minor corrections, and then we were able to publish the paper. So even industry also, when you are able to do some good chemistry, which may not be relevant from the industry, I will say API perspective point of view, because where the cost is not involved, but at the same time clinical trial is involved, you can fetch good publications. So industry always encourages patents as well as publications, provided it is not of any economics value. So we were able to publish this in spite of being in industry. So it is a wrong notion that industry doesn't allow publications, but then of course, if it is not of any economic significance, definitely industry will encourage, but otherwise patents, process patents are definitely there, so that no one can copy your process. So this is as far as my story on bromhexine as well as the glimepiride metabolites is concerned. So if you have any questions, I will be more than happy to answer. Next time if time comes, definitely I can deal with any other API which I have developed in my 23 years of service. Prior to closing this lecture, I would like to thank Dr. Uday Annapure, Director of ICT Jalna campus, for inviting me to give and share my thoughts with all young, vibrant students of ICT Mumbai as well as ICT Jalna or ICT IOC, I'm not sure. But then it is a great pleasure to interact with the students because you also learn, and even I think some faculty members are also there. So yeah, I will be more than happy to share if I have to answer any queries. So this is as far as my lecture is concerned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for exposing us to the practical aspects of the API industry. It was indeed very interesting and very different, I must say. Okay, so the floor is now open for questions. So please go ahead. Ask your queries, okay? So maybe I will start with a question.
Yes,
so sir,
yes.
I don't have a direct question regarding your presentation, but sir, as nowadays we see that lots of research papers, even in very good impact factor journals, are coming up on APIs isolated from natural products like plants. And so sir, what is the scope of such APIs in the market as compared to these chemically synthesized?
It depends on the if the natural product is available on large scale, then definitely industry will prefer isolation. But if the constituent is active, but at the same time, the natural product is not available in abundance, then definitely the industry will strive for the synthetic one. Or sometimes, for example, now paclitaxel, where the semi-synthetic one is there. So it entirely depends on the availability of the active principle in natural product. And if that is substantial amount is there, then the definitely isolation from natural source is always preferred, because here the number of steps are there, everything is there. But then again, in natural products, you have to be sure that your product has to be extra pure, because many times the natural products, because of the biogenesis, some related structures are there. So you'll have to have the specifications which are acceptable to International Conference on Harmonization. So that industry will always look up, particularly the authorities will have a look at those points very critically. So then only, so it depends on the availability of the active principle in natural source versus active, but not, so then you have to go for the synthesis.
Okay, sir. And sir, have you ever worked on any natural source, APIs from any natural source?
In one of the industry, I have worked when we were isolating digoxin, and then we were doing column chromatography. We were putting 18 kilos of digoxin crude. So it is having a mixture of all other, it's a triglyceride. So three, and then a glycone part is there. So from 18 kgs, it used to be typically a plant come lab isolation, because we used to do typical column chromatography. The column was virtually 2 floors. So that is, if I'm not mistaken, around 2 floors. So that is 18, so 8, 9, 20 feet column. And then we were used to charge from the 3rd floor, and used to the amount used to trickle down on the ground floor, and then the analysis, particularly the isolation part, was done by calorimetry. And then from 18 kilos, I remember the herbal dry herb, we used to isolate typically around 700 grams of digoxin. So when it used to come to laboratory for purification, because that was the best, because from 18 kgs, because there was chlorophyll, everything, other components were there, mixture of other compounds. But then this compound, so I have done practically for 5 years in one of the companies, we were isolating, and then that last 2 stages used to come to our lab, where we had a separate, I will say, area where the entry and everything were restricted, because this was a cardiac compound, and then was running into lakhs of rupees. So per kg. So digoxin. So we have isolated that, and we used to do it routinely. So every month we used to produce about 1.5 kg of digoxin. And then initial stages were, of course, on the plant scale, where the column chromatography was there. Silite was used as a packing material, not silica gel. Silica gel parvadta nahi hai. Silica gel is very costly. Silica gel or alumina. So silite was there. And then typically we used to hammer with, and then the silite that bed used to be so thick, and so only it will, and then sometimes we used to apply a pressure from top, so then it can trickle down. So initially chlorophyll fractions and other impurity fractions used to come, and then we used to monitor the reaction, and then the column also then used to wash with methanol, and so 3 or 4 times again that same silite was being used for the isolation of next 18 kilos crude material. And then 2 or 3 times, because column packing itself used to take about 2 or 3 days. So this is the story of digoxin.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you for sharing your wonderful experience.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
Sir, these days there is a lot of focus on environmental things. So these brominations are quite expensive, or they are quite hazardous from environmental perspective. So yes. How are their waste handled?
So sodium bromide, HBr and sodium bromide, particularly if you are dealing with, say, trimethoprim, where it involves extensive bromination, or here the bromhexine or ambroxol, where your mother liquor will contain HBr. So that mother liquor is not allowed to go directly to effluent treatment. So mother liquor is separated, it contains HBr, and there are some parties who are specialists in recovery of bromine from HBr or sodium bromide so that mother liquor is never allowed to trickle down to the effluent treatment plant. It is collected separately, and then there are drums, and then immediately you have to label the drums as HBR mother liquor without washings. Even washings are not allowed. And then whenever, suppose I am a bromine recovery agent, and if I come to your place, if you are a manufacturer, I will definitely check the percentage HBR, because otherwise I will end up in isolating a dilute HBR. So concentrated HBR layer is collected, washings are collected separately, and then based on the HBR percentage, the value is then decided. And then I will take, suppose I am a bromine recovery agent, I will take that bromine HBR mother liquor or sodium bromide mother liquor, I will convert back to bromine. But then nothing is wasted as far as bromine. Bromine is such a scarce item, I think about 0.4% from ocean water. So bromine is taken with, it is not allowed to dilute with water, because the bromine recovery agent will not take that bromine mother liquor from you, because otherwise it is too expensive exercise for him.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Dr. Nemade, I think I have made it clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Any questions from the students?
Hello,
Yes.
sir. Myself, Jinyasa Chintamani. I had a question.
Mm-hmm.
Sir, you just mentioned about changing of the solvent in one of your slides. So I wanted to ask, does like what are the important factors that are affected by changing of a solvent, and also how does it affect the market of the final product?
See, first of all, now when carbon tetrachloride was there in my case, the stringent requirement was there of carbon tetrachloride not more than 4 ppm. But we were able to manufacture because our process was optimized. So we were, but then carbon tetrachloride was posing health hazard problems for the workers, and more importantly, compared to carbon tetrachloride cost, chlorobenzene cost is much cheaper. So when carbon tetrachloride is discouraged because it's a ozone depleting agent, mutagenicity, everything. So even such solvents are there. If you are using class 1 solvents, then industry, particularly the global regulatory agency, for example, US FDA or EU, when they come for inspection, they will definitely discourage inspecting your plant. For example, when I was with the same company when manufacturing fluorbiprofen, our starting material was benzene. But then benzene was a part of the manufacturing process. So benzene was not a reagent. Benzene was not a solvent, it was a reagent. And then again, benzene ppm has to be less than class 1 solvent. So you have to pay attention when you are developing a process. In my case here in bromhexene, already the manufacturing was on with a traditional process in place, that is carbon tetrachloride. Carbon tetrachloride today, even in laboratory scale or even in when we are doing any laboratory work, benzene as well as carbon tetrachloride are totally discontinued because they are carcinogens, proven carcinogens. So these solvents are not supposed to be used. But then when I joined that time, this is about 15 years back, now they are continuing with the same process which we have developed. I know that. So we have to have for that. And then when you are replacing a solvent, particularly in the regulator market meaning you have a drug master file in place, you have everything validation with respect to solvent or OVS, that is organic volatile impurities, organic volatile solvents or organic volatile. So whenever you are changing any solvent change is considered as a major change. And whenever you are going and writing to authorities that you are going to change the solvent, there has to be a solid justification why you are doing so. So it should not be only because finally the agency is also going to look. In our case, we were lucky enough because carbon tetrachloride was there. It was a class 1 solvent. We were replacing by carbon 2 class 2 solvent. So it was encouraged by the global agency auditors, US FDA, EU, as well as we were exporting good amount to Japan. So all were really encouraging us, because with their letters, we were able to see the response that it's a good thing that you are replacing carbon tetrachloride. So whenever you are replacing any solvent, you have to do with extra care, because solvent change is considered as a major change. Just for solvent change, you cannot change that solvent.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions, students or faculty members also? Okay, sir. If we don't have any further questions, then I will thank you on behalf of the whole ICT March family. Thank you
Okay.
very much for this wonderful talk, sir. Really, it was really very informative, I must say.
Okay.
Thank you very much, sir.
It was a pleasure over here. Convey my regards to Dr. Baprasa Annapure, and I will take your leave.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.